Dr. Lira Malken stood at the edge of the borehole, her breath freezing into a fine mist as it spilled from her lips. The Arctic wind screamed across the barren plain of ice and snow, but Lira's attention was locked on the blackness yawning below. The borehole was narrow, maybe 2 feet across, and plunged hundreds of meters into the ancient ice cap. What she had heard, or thought she had heard, came from down there. "Anything yet?" a voice crackled through her headset. It was Roth, the head engineer. Mary hesitated before answering. "No, just the same silence as before." She stared harder into the dark, as though her eyes might pierce it. "But something is wrong. I thought I heard—" "Never mind. If it's about the sounds," Roth said carefully, "you're not the only one. Half the crew's been complaining about weird noises, probably just ice shifting. Echoes." "It wasn't ice shifting," Lira muttered, more to herself than to Roth. In truth, she'd heard it 4 nights ago for the first time. A low, mournful note that rose and fell in strange melodic patterns. The sound had slithered into her cabin while she lay sleepless, carrying with it an unsettling sense of otherness. By morning, she convinced herself it was the howling wind, and refocused on the research, until 2 nights ago, when she heard it again. Louder. This time, Lira wasn't alone. She sat up in bed. "The ice sings," one of the technicians had joked, but no one laughed. Everyone heard it, everyone felt it, and no one could explain it. Now they were digging deeper, drilling far beyond the expected limits for sediment analysis. Their mission to study ancient microbial life had become tangled with this bizarre auditory phenomenon. Lira tried to remain clinical about it, but her mind buzzed with discomfort. Visurgin kept her thoughts to herself, as the two tried to focus on a sediment analysis of the Major. The sound called to her, to all of them. That night the singing returned. Lira awoke suddenly, her heart racing. Her room was dark, the kind of deep, liquid blackness that made her feel suspended in space, and the song, if that's what it was clearer than ever. It resonated softly through the walls, vibrating through her bed frame, her bones. She sat up and pressed her hands against her ears, but it was no use. The sound was inside her. Beautiful, yes, hauntingly so, but also vast and unknowable, like something older than the earth itself was humming a lullaby in the dark. The notes rose and fell, shifting unexpectedly. It was not a melody humans could have composed. The intervals were wrong, alien. Mira shivered. "This can't be happening," she whispered. A sudden knock at her door startled her. "Dr. Malken?" a voice called softly. It was Tavik, one of the newer researchers. "You hear too, don't you?" Lira hesitated, then opened the door. Tovik stood there in his thermal gear, his pale face glistening with sweat despite the cold. His eyes were wide, almost feverish. Tovik reached out and gently squeezed Tovik's hand. "We have to go," he said. "Go where?" Lira asked, already knowing the answer. "The borehole," Tovik breathed. "It's louder down there. It wants us to listen." Lira felt a sick lurch in her stomach. "You want to go out there?" she hissed. "It's a blizzard, Tovik, and you're not making any sense." But Tovik only smiled faintly, as though she was a child who didn't understand something obvious. "It's waiting for us." Lira closed the door on him, locking it tight. But the sound lingered in her ears, as though the very walls of the station had begun to sing. The following morning, Tovik was missing. The crew turned out in force to search for him, but the storm had wiped away all trace of footprints. Lira listened to the wind howl outside the research station, drowning out the low whispers of the crew. Even as they spoke, she could hear it, the faint hum underlying every word. "He wouldn't have gone far," Roth muttered to her over coffee. "He was just unwell. Stress, you know? The isolation gets to some people." Lira didn't answer. She couldn't tell Roth that she had heard the song again the moment Tovik disappeared. It was louder now, resonating deep within her chest, as though a tuning fork had been struck inside her ribcage. She studied the faces of the crew as they returned from their fruitless search. They looked exhausted, their expressions blank. Their eyes, though, glistened in the cold light, hollow, as if something inside them was retreating. Then the drilling team burst in, their faces pale. "We found something," one of them stammered. Roth set down his mug. "What kind of something?" The man swallowed hard. You'd better come see for yourself." The borehole was different now. The air around it seemed to hum with anticipation, and as Lira approached, she felt a strange pressure in her ears, as though the very atmosphere were denser here. Her teeth vibrated subtly in her skull. The team had hauled up a sample from the bottom of the borehole. It lay in a steel tray at the edge of the pit, encased in ice. Lira bent closer, her breath fogging the surface. Beneath the ice was something dark and irregular, not a fossil, not a rock. It was flesh, or something like it. It stretched unnaturally, as though it refused to adhere to a natural form. "Is that organic?" Roth asked, his voice tight. Lira didn't answer immediately. She peeled off a glove and touched the ice. To her shock, it was warm. "This shouldn't be possible," she murmured. "It's pulsing," someone whispered. Lira blinked and looked closer. They were right. The thing beneath the ice moved ever so slightly, as though it breathed. Another ship said, suddenly shaking the tray. Lira jumped back. And the song was everywhere. It vibrated through the ice, through their bodies, into the marrow of their bones. Roth's face slackened. One of the techs smiled vacantly. "We need to stop," Lira said abruptly. She turned to Roth. "We need to steal the hole, burn the sample. This is wrong." "Minchia." Roth looked at her, his expression vacant. The others stared, unmoving, as though her words were incomprehensible. And then she realized. They were humming. They were humming the song. Lira locked herself in the lab that night, determined to analyze the sample alone. The others were acting strange, silent, obedient to something she couldn't understand. Through the microscope, the fragment of flesh looked impossibly complex. Its cells were not like Earth cells, not carbon-based, not alive in any traditional sense. They pulsed with rhythm, as though vibrating to a frequency just beyond human hearing. The ice around the fragment continued to thaw, despite the lab's freezing temperature. "It's not the ice melting," she thought, suddenly. "It's the thing waking up." Then Lira heard footsteps. A soft knock came at the door. "Dr. Malken," Roth's voice called. "Open up. We need to talk." Lira backed away from the door. "Go away, Roth." "Don't be afraid," Roth continued. His tone was calm. Too calm. "It wants to show us something. It's beautiful, Lira. You just need to see it." Behind him, others joined in. They whispered in unison, their voices a low chorus. Lira clapped her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The song was in her mind. By the time Lira escaped the station, the crew was gone, or perhaps absorbed was the better word. The song filled the entire complex, vibrating through the walls, rattling the glass. Crunk. She stumbled through the snow, the storm raging around her, back to the borehole. The hum was deafening now. Louder. Louder. And then she saw it. The ice around the hole had fractured, spiderweb cracks radiating outward. The ground itself moved, rising and falling in slow undulations. The thing beneath the ice was massive, impossibly so. What they had uncovered was not a creature, but a piece of something greater. A fragment of a sentient entity, so large it defied comprehension, frozen in time, but now beginning to stir. Lira fell to her knees, her mind splitting beneath the weight of its song. She saw visions, galaxies burning, civilizations crushed beneath tides of darkness, an eternal hunger stretching across the void. The thing had no name, because names could not contain it. It had no purpose, because it simply was. And it was waking up. As the last of the ice cracked open, Lira understood the truth. The song had never been calling to them. It had been spreading. When the rescue team arrived weeks later, they found the station abandoned. The equipment was wrecked, the borehole collapsed. In the frozen wasteland, they found no bodies, only the faint echo of a song that no one could quite place. and far beneath the ice, the fragment waited.